everybody for tuning in to Coder Conversations. If you've missed any past episodes and you want to catch up, go to www.coderconvos.com. I'm your host Kevin. I'm with my co-host Brian.
Hey, Brian Russick here, professional drummer, drum teacher, teaching out of Suffolk County, Long Island, downtown Port Jeff. You can find me on the web, brianrussick.com.
And tonight we have a returning guest, Owen Andruchow, video game composer and more. Welcome to the show. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you guys. It's great to be here.
Yeah, man, great to have you back on. We're curious to see what you've been working on.
Yeah, so I remember last time we talked a lot about networking, and I have just basically been continuing to apply all of those strategies, that mindset, and I'm continuing to see growth. So this past year, I scored 2 game demos and a game trailer, all of which are up on Steam. I'm working on a small indie project right now. I just went to GDC, met a number of people, and I think I've got a few valid prospects. So we'll see how that pans out.
Nice.
And then some film stuff intermingled as well. I do the 48-hour film festival stuff whenever I can, which are kind of like game jams. I don't know if guys have heard of game jams, but they're kind of like game jams. You make a film within 48 hours, or sometimes it's like 72 hours, something like that. So yeah, on the side, I'm still doing a similar sort of hustle with film. But most of the opportunity here in Seattle is in games. And of course, GDC is a huge event too, which I was just at. So
yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your experience most recently at GDC?
Actually, yeah, GDC was interesting this year. So I don't know if you guys have ever been, but there are these different levels of passes. There's the main expo pass, which gets you onto the expo floor where all of a ton of game developers and then larger companies like Amazon or Meta.
Yeah.
Really, just everything in tech, but then also, obviously, especially gaming is down there, and they have booths and they're showing off their, newest products, trying to get engagement, whatever. I spent most of my time at the indie booths where all of the indie game developers are and showing their new games, because, that's where my client base is going to be. I think the big difference between the way I approached this year and last year is like on the first day, I kind of asked myself the question, why am I here? I'm really here to find clients, right? Like that's why I'm doing all this. And then I kind of changed my approach on that first day to just spend all of my time on the expo floor, and then all of my time in other social areas like Yerba Buena Gardens, which is this meeting area right outside the Moscone Center, which is where GDC is held. Just starting conversations, trying to meet people, and doing what I can to be social and like promote myself without promoting myself, right? Without being kind of too aggressive about it, but just like make it known that I'm a composer. And if the conversation leads in a direction where I think they might be in need of someone like me, I'll be sure to say something like, well, what do you do for music, right? And if they have a composer, then, that's great. If they don't, then I say, well, I'd love to stay in touch. And just kind of having that conversation over and over and over again, to the point where, get the business cards.
Yeah.
And I think that a big difference between this year and last year is like this year I realized I'm just going to do this for 5 days straight, right? Whereas last year I was kind of just wandering around and seeing what happened. But this year was a lot more directed, and I had all these events that I was going to go to, these talks, whatever. I think I ignored about 80 to 90% of it and just decided, you know what? I just need to be at the places where the people are, where the indie devs are. Like that's who I'm here to talk to. And time will, we were talking before we went live here, but time will tell if it was a successful strategy, right? Because usually these things take a little while to materialize, but I'm seeing the first, increments of it. So I'm optimistic. Yeah.
Cool. So have you ever been to that festival called NAMM, NAMM?
I have not, no.
Okay. So it's not for video games specifically, it's just for music in general. and there's all types of vendors that show up. So like you'll have your Yamaha, Peisty, Remo, Marshall, you have all these big companies, but then there's panels. Like our friend Marcus Manderson, I think he talked at a panel at the most recent NAMM. I went once about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was kind of like you were saying, like just like bouncing around from place to place, not really sure what I'm doing, what my strategy is. I feel like if I went back to NAMM today, I would have a very targeted approach, like you're saying.
Yeah, that was the big adjustment I made. And I'll probably continue to make as I go to these smaller meetups, like these local Seattle ones and whatever else I go to. But I want to get myself out to more conferences like Game Sound Con, maybe go to NAMM, other things like that for sure.
So what led you to wanting to take a more targeted approach? Did you find like last year it wasn't really as effective as you expected it to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. It just kind of occurred to me. Let's see. So the conference is 5 days long, and I actually got there a little early for like a pre-GDC meetup the Sunday before the beginning of the week. So I was there for a while, and on the first official day, I think I was just hanging around a bit, taking a look at my schedule, and I think I maybe started the day off with a few like good conversations, right? And I've been having these sorts of conversations for a couple of years now, like seriously networking in the space for 2 years. And after a couple of conversations, I was like, oh, that went pretty well. I think that person was interested. I think I was lucky to get like a little bit of an early spark where I just realized I was like, I feel like I should just be doing this for the whole week. Kind of, put everything else to the side. There were some panels, there were some events, there were some events that I did end up going to. Like I saw an Austin Wintory concert up at the main stage, which was great. There were some mixers here and there that I went to, but like I don't think I went to any of the talks. I didn't even go to the panels that I was expecting to go to, which can be useful. It was kind of like an epiphany moment, It's just like, oh wait, this is why I'm here. Let's just keep on doing this. And I got to tell you, it was exhausting. Like it was
right.
It was very tiring.
For sure.
Yeah, I had to force myself, especially those last like 2 days.
I mean, how much of a introvert or how much of an extrovert would you describe yourself as?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like in social settings for me, I'm under this like medium to thin sheet of ice, socially, where like I have to break through it, and then all of a sudden I don't care. Yeah. But every time I enter a social situation, especially if it's like around strangers, obviously, I could easily be the person that like doesn't talk to anybody. I have to force myself.
Yeah, that's me.
Through those first conversations, and then it just feels easier. And then it's like that ice was never there, So it's
right.
I feel like I can be in both modes. I don't know if you describe that like an introverted extrovert or whatever, but that's
like
kind of
once you get the wheels moving on the car or the train, then it starts to kind of move along.
Right, and then the fear kind of goes away a little bit,
Right.
Yeah. What it sounds like you're doing is almost like sales. So have you ever thought about taking like a sales closing type of class? And
right. Well, I've learned a bit about sales actually marketing specifically. So there's this book called The One-Page Marketing Plan by Alan Dibb. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but so Alan Dibb teaches. I mean, he teaches business. I'd say he has a few books on it, and he has these 2 books on marketing. And the story he tells is how he wanted to be an entrepreneur, and he started taking business courses, and I think he had something of a business mentor that he paid for, and he created this entire business plan. And at the end of it, he felt like the whole thing was just junk, like filled with all these statistics that he didn't need and whatnot, other than this one aspect of it, which he said was the marketing portion of his plan. And he thought that stuff was actually useful, and you could actually approach starting a business through the lens of marketing. So again, I think we were talking about this a bit before we got on the mics here, but I'm going to start trying to do that more focused on my Instagram page. I post, my posts have been a bit sparse. I'm going to try to take some of that advice, like the sales advice, and use that on my marketing page. Again, without being too pushy, because like developers and filmmakers, they don't love being sold to. So you gotta like draw that fine line. But on the flip side of that, he does also have a lot of good advice for, the more in-person aspect of it. And you can, a lot of these skills are kind of transferable too. So yeah, that's interesting that you say that, Kevin, because it really is somewhat of an art of selling yourself, especially in this industry where you do have to be a little sly about it, I guess. You can't be that pushy, and you got to really be genuinely interested in the person you're talking to. But to be honest, it's like, yeah, I think the big difference is I just had to admit to myself when I was there at GDC, I am here to find work. I am here to find clients.
Right. What am I, at the end of the day,
like,
what am I doing?
Really is
what am I doing here? Yeah.
And that gave me a little bit more focus, a little bit more energy, so.
Yeah, like you mentioned, it does take into sales because like nobody likes someone that's pushy. Like even on LinkedIn lately, you get a lot of people that just spam your inbox and try to sell their services. And if they're pushy, you just end up blocking them. So you got to kind of provide value without being too obvious.
You got to provide value. You got to build trust. So I figured out a little bit of a loose script for myself. This was one of the things that I realized like on that first day. I was like, I can just do this a bunch of times. Where you meet someone and you just start talking about their projects. I mean, most people there have some sort of project they're working on. There's a ton of indie devs there and they're building their game. And a lot of people there in that space are building like either their first title or their first big title. Maybe they've done a bunch of game jams and now they're trying to do something commercial. So you ask a bunch of questions about that. And I think what I've gained from these past 2 years living in Seattle is just learning a lot about the game industry so that I can have a smooth conversation about it. I don't think I could have done that early on. I just didn't know enough. But now I just know what questions to ask, what are the game mechanics? What are your inspirations? Just certain maybe technical things, whatnot, that I wouldn't have known otherwise. But being able to keep up that conversation, eventually one of the questions that you ask, which I said earlier, is, oh, so then what do you do for music? Right. And in the context of that conversation, it's no different than any other question you ask. Like they may know you're a composer, they may not, but you didn't force it at the beginning of the conversation. And you can throw it in there and they don't feel like they're being bombarded by a desperate composer who needs a job, So,
right. If you just go in right away saying, hey, I'm so-and-so, I do this, let me know if you need my services.
Exactly. And that's the big mistake that a lot of composers make. And
yeah.
So, and it was a bit exhausting to like know that I'm going to go in there with like, it's like a half-baked agenda a little bit. But the truth is I find indie developers to be the most interesting people in the world, because they just got so much, they have so many interesting ideas. So the conversations are genuinely fruitful to have in and of themselves. You learn a lot. And then of course if you come away with a potential opportunity, that's great, but it's not like the conversations are painful and, it's nothing like that. On all the conversations I had with people, which are most of them, where it doesn't lead to a prospect, I still feel like I learned something valuable and I get to see what this person is creating. Learning about someone making their art is always a fun thing too. So yeah.
Yeah, that's still a rich experience you're describing.
For sure. Yeah, that's if all of it wasn't a rich experience, I think that's a really good way to put it. I don't think it would be bearable, right?
Yeah.
I wouldn't still be here, but it is. It truly is a rich experience, which would make the whole outing, even if I didn't find any work at all, it would still make the whole outing worth it to go to. That's what makes any given networking event worth it to go to, because you're usually not finding work on every single networking event. They're spread out, but
Yeah.
it's a genuinely interesting and fun place to be. So
Yeah, it seems like you snagged a couple of gigs. What about those interactions? Like, were there any telltale signs like, okay, this is probably going to lead to paid work, or I did pretty good here?
yeah, that's a good question. So I guess so far, let's see, GDC was 2 weeks ago now. We're at April 8th, 1, 2. It was 3 weeks ago. I waited a little bit, and I followed up, and I found a few people were interested and keeping in touch, and that's a good sign. I guess a way to answer that question is there are a couple of signs, right? I don't know if sometimes you get like an immediate yes, and that's really lucky. Actually, that happened to me last year. I just happened to meet people who were trying to release their demo that summer, and they knew they needed music and they didn't have a composer, and they really energized. And like a week later, they reached out to me. So that was just lucky, right? So that's a clear telltale sign that, okay, I basically got the gig. This year, nothing like that happened. I think a lot of these are going to be more slow, but I think I got more potential opportunities than last year because I kind of went through it a bit more systematically. So I guess one I don't know what you'd call it, like just one point of confirmation that this might lead to something is their answer to the question. So what do you do for music? Which you kind of throw in there like halfway through the conversation. And I think it's in the answer to that question. Oh, we don't have music, or we do have a composer. Or if they say we don't have a composer, and you can tell that they're like interested in you, and they've kind of given you a bit of an invitation to like sell yourself a little bit, that's a good sign. Because there is also the situation where they say, oh, we don't have anybody, but we're kind of looking, and they're not necessarily interested in you. It's like, that's okay. But if you have their interest and it's, they don't have anybody at the moment, that's a good opportunity for you to like exchange business cards, exchange information, whatnot, keep the conversation going.
Yeah, I'd imagine that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, you need the verbal confirmation, but then you need like the attitude confirmation too, I'd say. So there's that. And there's just like the general feeling you get after you walk away from it. It's like, okay, that felt really good. I feel good about that conversation. I feel good about following up. Like this one feels like in a good spot. So I guess that's the whole, that in general is maybe the first part. And then the second part is keeping up the conversation over email or LinkedIn. Or Instagram, but most of my follow-ups have been through email or LinkedIn. And it's great when you get a response where, they do a little bit of the work for you, where you're not having to constantly allude to saying like, oh, I'd love to work on your project. I mean, if they feel like they have the motivation to say, we'll definitely keep in touch and let you know how this goes, maybe follow up in like 2 months, like that's a great sign, right? Because you know that you're on their radar, because that's what you want to be. You want to be the person they think of.
Like, are they going to, I think what you're trying to say is like, are they going to meet you halfway, right?
Yeah. Do they want to bring you onto their project, right? Are you still trying to convince them, or are they convinced and they just need to let you know when the right time is, right? Or do you feel like you have the invitation to continue sending messages without them getting annoyed, right? And a good indication that you are in that safe space is if they say something like, it was great to meet with you. We're in our early stages, but maybe in 3 to 6 months or so, we'll be in a more secure situation to bring on a composer. So why don't you reach out again then? It's a bit more of an invitation to continue the conversation. Now, that being said, if they aren't certain, that doesn't necessarily mean no, right? That just means it might not be as likely. But no is really the only thing that means no, unless you just aren't getting a response. Then that probably means no as well. But there are kind of gradations of the likelihood that you'll land the gig, and getting a sense of like how excited they are to bring you on is a good indication that, yeah, this will likely happen. And I feel like I've gotten a couple of those at least, which is a good sign. So that feels good.
Yeah, it seems like being a musician, it's almost like 50% sales and then 50% actually composing or playing, because if nobody hears what you're doing or they're not aware of your services, you're not making any money.
It is,
Yeah.
especially to start, at least. I mean, it could be even more like 60-40 or 70-30. Hopefully you get to the point. I mean, I know people who have gotten to the point where they don't have to sell themselves as much, but that part of the, at least in my experience, that part of the equation is definitely front loaded, in terms of being maybe even the majority of what you do. But yeah, and that's a skill that I don't think, I mean, I certainly didn't know I was going to have to figure out when I applied to grad school and when I was in school. I mean, people kind of told me. It's funny. People told me, it's like, yeah, you're gonna have to do this. I was like, no, I'll just get a job. Like, it'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't think about it. I just pushed it away because I was just so focused on school. But then once I graduated, I figured it out that was a necessity, and I've been working on that quite a bit since. But it doesn't always feel so uncomfortable as it does when you start, which is a good sign. So I guess the rhythm of it is a bit more clear to me, even, a bit more than it was last year for sure. And that definitely feels good. And when the rhythm of it feels smoother, you don't feel like you have to put a ton of energy, even if it's like technically taking up the same amount of time. It's not necessarily taking up the same amount of your attention, or your energy. You're not worrying about it as much. So
Yeah, for me, I think it has a lot to do with, is this person meeting me halfway? Because if they
yeah, yeah,
are, then great, but if they're not, then okay, don't waste my time, basically.
yeah, that's a good way to put it. And I think it's worth giving people a shout maybe a couple times. I usually, if I'm following up with someone over email or just trying to get their attention, just for my own sake of, not wanting to spend too much of my own time on it, I usually give them like 3 emails spread over a decent amount of time, depending on the situation, maybe over a couple months or a couple weeks. And if they haven't responded, then it probably means they're not interested, and I'm just going to move my time somewhere else. Because you're right, you do want people to meet you halfway, because that's just a healthy business relationship, right? You don't want to have
Right.
to do all that work.
Right.
You want a client who is interested in what you have to offer, right, and is interested in that partnership. So that's definitely a great way to put it.
Have you thought about like any alternative means of marketing, maybe like starting your own podcast that can get you in touch with like game developers or other composers, and they could pass opportunities your way?
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Um, one thing that I've done in the past, which has performed fairly well on TikTok, given that I've only posted 3 times on TikTok, is doing performances in my studio with a backing track and then playing an instrument on my keyboard to that backing track. I think you can make that look very impressive, and you can catch people's attention doing that. So I'm going to try to make more serious videos of myself doing things, and just, instead of only posting like after I've completed a project. Like the last thing I posted was this trailer I scored back in like February, I think. And I had that made and I posted it, and that was nice, but I don't want to necessarily have to wait till something happens for me to post. So I'm trying to just like accumulate all of my music that I have already made, that haven't necessarily been tied to a certain project, that I can rebrand, create a few new things to seriously go after having a presence on Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. And I'm going to try to like front load the content creation too, so I'm not scrambling each week to get things done. But I think that's that's going to be my next serious strategy for alternative ways to brand myself, not just in person but online, is trying to like strategize and take advantage of those three platforms in the best way I can.
And I think one thing we could probably both agree on, or all three of us, is that content is king. You need to have content. You need to have, worthwhile content that people actually want to consume.
Which is why I'm trying to consider what the best kinds of content is to make, right? Let's get the most engagement. Like you gotta search up popular hashtags and find other composers who are successful and base it off them, and reach out to other composers. Like I reached out to this composer actually a week ago and he had a few really cool videos of some cinematics he scored with then his digital audio workstation screen below it, and he was playing the music and you could see the music on the lower half of the screen and then the video on the top half of the screen. And I just thought that was really cool. So I reached out to him, gave him a few compliments and said, what software do you use to make that? Like, I'd love to model some of my stuff after you. It's really great. He appreciated that. He gave me the software. That started a bit of like a conversation between us. So I'm probably going to be doing a little bit more of that to figure out what does, what performs best. Because you're right, content is king and you can be posting all the time, but if it's not something that people really care to engage with, that might have been a waste of time. And that, you don't want anything to be a waste of time.
Yeah, I think that's my point. Like you really want to make sure you have quality content and that you're posting, at least fairly regularly, probably at least once a week.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too. I'm still trying to figure out how much I want to post, but once a week sounds doable. I'm okay with maybe doing it less so long as it's consistent. Because like another thing that I want to do is have it all scheduled out so I can kind of put it into this planner app. I haven't found one yet, but I know they exist. This planner app where it'll essentially you kind of preload everything and it just posts for you. And I think I'm okay with favoring consistency over quantity if I need to. So if I realize I just don't have enough time to create a post every week for every week of the year, say, maybe I'll do it like every week and a half, every 2 weeks. But so long as it's consistent, that's what kind of matters to me. Because again, I'm out there meeting people in person. I've kind of got that groove going. So this online stuff is there to support that. I haven't yet, if I'm ever at the space where I'm like pivoting to mainly online and like that's how I'm actually gaining most of my clientele, it would probably have to be a bit more aggressive than just twice or once every 2 weeks or so.
Right.
But I think what I'm going to prioritize in guiding the way I structure it is consistency and see where that gets me at least as an initial strategy.
Yeah, I know with the podcast, consistency has kind of gotten us to this point. We do twice a week, typically Tuesday and Friday nights, 8 p.m. Eastern. And, we never cancel on people. Sometimes people will cancel on us, then that's just part of the game. But, me and Kevin, we always show up ready, willing, and just excited to do the program.
Yeah, that's great. And it seems like you guys have been on a roll. So congrats on that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I find like consistency is really important because if people don't know when to expect you, they're not going to actively go seek out your content because, we're mostly on push based platforms. We're like TikTok. TikTok is going to push new videos in the feed. YouTube, you go to the suggestions, is pushing new stuff. So if you're not regularly putting content in the machine, then you're just going to get lost in the mix.
And you know what else is important is engagement, because most of these social media platforms, they reward profiles that engage more. So if you're on Instagram and you are not only posting, but you're actively liking other people's posts, you're commenting, you're maybe sending out DMs, the algorithm tracks that a little bit to different extents on different platforms. And you'll have better success with your own posts if you're an active member of whatever community you're posting to. So actually, this is something I didn't mention, but this is something that I have been doing recently, is spending maybe 20 minutes for like 4 or 5 days a week, just going on Instagram, looking up popular hashtags, commenting, liking, following if I'm interested, going on my own feed, commenting, liking. Like it's not a hard thing to do, especially if you're looking at content that you find genuinely interesting. So it's like you're actually being entertained.
Sure.
Yeah, in doing all that will bode well for your own profile. You'll inevitably, I think the algorithm will favor people who tend to do that.
Have you thought about like doing like Q&A sessions just to increase engagement? Like maybe you do answer a question like, "Oh, how I became a video game composer," something like that, something to give people
Yeah,
a reason to comment.
that would be a good one. Maybe like a I know people on Instagram have like their own stations or something. I can't exactly remember what it's called, but every once in a while I get this invite from maybe a musician friend of mine that say, join so and so's channel. I think that's what it is, where people are probably doing things like that. That's definitely something to consider. I think people like being a part of what you're doing. So you can ask engaging questions to them and ask them to participate. Maybe the most basic example of this is posting something on your story where they get to answer a question or like respond to a poll. But then if you maybe invite them into like a live stream, that could probably even be more effective. So yeah, I'd definitely consider doing things like that.
What about building a community? Say you start a Discord and then you kind of funnel people into your Discord just so that you have regulars that always show up, and they may end up sliding you a new opportunity.
It's funny. I actually did create a Discord channel recently because it for some reason. So I have Discord on my digital business card, but for some reason they don't really let you easily create a link to just your Discord profile. What they do let you easily do is create a link to a Discord channel. So I created a channel just so people could connect to me in my profile and send me a message and everything. And then I kind of just left it at that. And I did that recently, just a couple of weeks ago, because I realized this problem when a few people, from GDC were like, "Hey, your Discord link doesn't work." It's like, "Oh, okay, I need to fix that." So
Yeah. Okay.
yes. So, but no, that's a good point, Kevin. I could bolster that and I could make that bigger and I could like invite people into my musical world in a sense. So that's definitely worth considering. I might go ahead and test some things out there.
Yeah, I think community building is really where it's at these days, because it seems like with most of these major platforms, they pretty much have their big stars. They really push those, and everybody else is kind of left scrambling for views. But that doesn't matter as much if you have a community of like really focused people who interact and help each other out. I think that could alleviate some of the pressure trying to be big on social media.
Well, yeah, it's this is why people have email lists too. That's something I have considered actually. I have thought about. Um, Email lists are great, and things like Discord kind of does this as well, where you can build your own community. You can get like a specific focused engagement, not just like whatever is out there in the mass of people on a certain social media platform. So yeah, you get like focused people engaged, specifically interested in what you're doing. The reason why I think email lists might be the best way to do that, what I've heard is that if for whatever reason something happened to YouTube, if for whatever reason something happened to Instagram, you no longer have any of those followers. I mean, it's not like that's likely, but it's just kind of this like cognitive security you have of it's like if I have my subscribers, like I know I have a secure following no matter what happens to any of these platforms. And actually, now that I think of it, like that's basically what happened to Twitter and X. Like that platform has transformed, and which is why a lot of people are moving over Blue Sky, right? So it's kind of volatile. That could happen anywhere. That's unless, somehow email, somehow something happens to Gmail itself, which is very unlikely, nothing's going to characteristically change the nature of your email list
Sure.
or your newsletter rather, or for that matter, your Discord channel. The same logic applies. So it's good to have that as kind of like a backstop to the more broader outreach you get on something like Instagram or TikTok or even YouTube or something like that.
Now, with your online marketing, what are some of the tips and tricks that you would recommend someone that's more entry level in the field? What would they do?
Well, I have to admit, I'm at the beginning stages myself of online marketing. I think maybe not to get yourself too overwhelmed, like what I was saying before, maybe prioritize consistency over quantity. I think that's a good place to start. If you're a YouTuber, something I've heard is like, don't spend too much time on your first few videos, because what you'll realize is like your most passionate pet idea might not be what everybody in whatever community you are sending your stuff out to resonates with. You're going to have to figure out what people resonate with, which means you're going to have to post a bunch of things until you've figured that out. And then maybe once you've figured out a certain kind of topic, then you can dive deeper into it. But I think I think a mistake that I've heard that YouTubers make specifically is that they come up with a brilliant idea of some sort and then just put everything they have into it. And it might be an incredible video too, but they haven't built the market for it, or they haven't figured out like the editing formula, what is successful on YouTube. And then they put all of this energy into something that effectively flops. So maybe I could generalize that piece of advice to which I think I'm trying to follow right now too, is like play to my strengths. But if I come up with an idea for, say, like an Instagram reel, and I'm like, this is probably going to take me a week to do, maybe do the thing that might take you a day to do, or like an afternoon to do, and see how those perform. Because they might
see what that does.
Yeah. And if that's starting to go well, and now I feel like I have the time and the energy, or maybe since I've had these few successes, I feel like I can take a risk on something deeper. Go ahead and do that. But start smaller and build from there, maybe, is the way to do it, because it's such a daunting task to build anything from nothing, especially like social media or YouTube, when you're just kind of blasting it out to whoever's going to see it, and you don't really know who that audience is yet.
Yeah, for me, like if we're talking TikTok, I usually go into my rehearsal studio on a Saturday, bang out, an album's worth of tracks, so maybe 11, 12 different tracks, and I just do first takes. I don't bother doing second takes, third takes, because to me, kind of, I'm more of that jazz mindset that the first take, that's where the feeling is. So I'll just kind of bang that all out in an hour on a Saturday, and then I'll just slow drip that content over the next week or two, posting at least one video a day on Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah. So, you don't have to worry about getting it all out every single day, or recording something every single day. You kind of get yourself into that headspace.
Where you can just focus and say, okay, look, I'm going to schedule this hour and I'm going to work on these songs, or I'm going to work on this stuff. And you stick to that, you stick to your schedule, you do it. And as long as you can stick to that, it's been working for me. I've been getting, 10, 11, 12 videos that I can then edit down to 60-second clips to use for Instagram and TikTok.
Yeah, that's important too, is creating a schedule for yourself and try to be honest and like stick to it. But then sometimes it's good to not have specific goals, but to have like general direction goals, So like, just to say, if I work on whatever, if I'm working on my Instagram presence for 6 months, it might not be as useful to say something like, I want to create 30 posts, because like, you haven't really started making posts yet. You're not exactly sure how much time it's going to take to make one post. And say you take much more time than expected to get something done, even if it's really good, you've set this unrealistic bar for yourself. They didn't know it was unrealistic at the time, but lo and behold, it was unrealistic. And then even though you've done something and you've created something, you kind of feel like you failed because you didn't meet that like specific pointed goal that you said you were going to meet. But instead, if you just say, I'm going to spend 3 months and I have these 2 days in my calendar each week that I'm going to work on this, and I'm just going to substantially improve. That's how can you fail doing that?
That's
so long
huge.
as you're actually doing it.
Yeah,
Yes,
that's huge.
And it's good for your mindset. And maybe once you've gotten to the groove where you're like, I know how long each one is going to take me, and I feel more comfortable setting hard-lined goals for myself, you can maybe do it then. But it's a hard thing to do when you're just starting out at something. It's a hard thing to do. It's crazy how many times I made this mistake before I like realized to stop doing this to myself. You
Yeah.
kind of have to go through it in order to realize it.
You have to make mistake. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
thing that a lot of people don't want to admit. Yeah, you're going to mess up. Yeah, you're going to make mistakes, but it's really all part of the process. It's all part of the game. You just got to get yourself out there. And like Kevin was saying earlier, the consistency is huge. I know for our podcast, the consistency is what has driven the ship up until this point and will continue to drive the ship going forward.
Yeah, that's it. That's what keeps you on the top of mind of other people, which is where you want to be.
And I think another thing is you have to realize is that when you're doing social media, you're running a commercial for yourself. Like you really have to think of it like that. Like, is this grabbing the user's attention? Is it directing them towards my product? People invest billions of dollars into, advertising because it works. So, with social media, we're establishing our brand. So, not only do you have to be consistent, it has to look good, it has to be engaging, and I think it has to be targeted. It has to somehow shuttle them into whatever you want them to do. Like, okay, I want to meet people who might be interested in engaging with my services. So, maybe at the end you throw something out there about that.
Yeah, well, so I feel like that's really knowing what your target audience is and then creating content for that. And actually, a big reason why I think I've delayed the social media thing is because I really wanted to think about that. And this is kind of what I did at GDC. I realized I'm here to find work with indie game developers. That is my market.
That's the goal. Yeah.
Socially, I tried to pull all those moves in person to accomplish that. And, like I said, I think it's working out. On social media, composers do quite a lot of things on social media. A lot of things that composers do is they do educational content. And a lot of composers create a career out of doing educational content. They can, YouTube videos do really well. They sell courses. They sell tools, like something like a rate finder tool to help you calculate what your rate should be. Like I've used things like that and I find them very valuable, and or selling orchestral templates, things of that nature. You can create income off of that. Your audience is other composers, though. And if you want your audience to be, in my case, I want my audience to be game developers and film directors, right? Those are really the people I'm going towards.
Right.
So I could start doing educational content, and it might even bolster my followers significantly. I might be getting a lot of views, but who are the people actually viewing? Is that going to lead to gigs per se? It might, but if I'm trying to target developers specifically, I want to create content that will impress them.
Yeah.
So I want to optimize for that, which is why I'm thinking of this performance stuff does well, like just showcasing my music and showing that I'm, a capable composer that can entertain you, the filmmaker, that can impress you, the filmmaker, you, the developer. So that's kind of racking around in my brain right now. And I'm trying to think of ideas to optimize for that.
Like one thing I know Brian did, he created a soundtrack for like shooting, like kind of like Raiden and those kind of games, the space shooters, and he took the gameplay footage and put his soundtrack to that. So maybe like remixing games, take their gameplay footage, but you put your soundtrack behind it, and just doing something like that. And if somebody really likes it, they'd be like, "Oh, what is this? Wow!"
Yeah, reimaginations. I know sound designers do that a lot. You can do that as a composer too. A reimagination of something famous with your own music, and like then asking people's input, like, what do you think? Getting them to engage. That's good for sure. It'll capture people's attention immediately because the visual might be something that they recognize, but then maybe they hear that it's a bit different, and that kind of draws them in. I actually I've created these content pillars for myself. I'm workshopping content pillars for myself, actually, I should say, and that is one of them. That's one of the more high effort ones because it does require to write something brand new for a post, for a reel, or for something on TikTok or LinkedIn. So there would be less of that because I am trying to make use of like stuff I already have written, right? Because we're going back to do like the high quality but low effort and see how that works, and then work your way up. But sprinkling some of that stuff in there, some of that more high effort content, I think can be very useful. So I did make a little bit of room for some stuff like that. Exactly what you were.
Now, in terms of marketing and networking, what would you say the number one thing that you've done in the past year is?
Man, that's a good question. I've in person, going back to in-person stuff, I've realized it just started to get a little bit easier for me. And I don't know if I can pinpoint an exact reason why, other than just to say that I've been doing it for a while. So around like December or November of last year is when I got an opportunity to score a game trailer for a developer who's now using that trailer, put it in his pitch deck, and is pitching for funding at the moment. And since then, I have met another developer who I'm negotiating with right now. I've met a number of people at GDC. I'm getting closer to my film industry contacts, and that feels a little bit more comfortable. And there's some sort of flow of having just been at it for 2 years and knowing my ecosystem around me, which has been helpful. So I think to answer your question, it would be something like knowing that it's a marathon and not a sprint, right?
Yeah.
Keeping it up and not expecting anything grand from just this next event you're doing, but just knowing that it'll accumulate and it will get easier over time in some sort of like
Yeah, like it'll snowball over time.
Yeah, at least it'll feel like that. And I think it's funny, I keep on thinking I'm getting to a point where it's like, I think what happens in a lot of composers' careers, they kind of do this exponential curve up, and then they plateau for a little bit somewhere like pretty comfortable, right, where they're like working. And I've been like feeling this for like a year that plateau is about to happen, and I'm getting there, and it's just a matter of time until it does. And then there's probably like another curve, and then you plateau again, and so on and so forth. I'd say I'm still on my first curve, but it's each month or every 6 months or every year, it feels substantially different than the months or year that came before it. So remember to have that perspective too. Like, don't compare yourself to others, really. Just compare yourself to yourself from 6 months ago or a year ago and see what that looks like, and use others as inspiration, but don't necessarily compare yourself to them.
Can you let our listeners know how long you've been at it in general?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Let's see. I moved to Seattle for the master's program in film scoring at the Pacific Northwest Film Scoring Program. I did the 2021-2022 year. So I graduated in July of 2022. I took that period of like August to December. I didn't necessarily take it off, but it wasn't, I graduated and then I was trying to like figure out what I wanted to do. Like, did I want to move to LA? For a while, I was actually thinking I was going to move to LA. Did I want to move back home, or was I seriously going to focus on games or, film? So there was this like 6 month period, maybe 3 to 6 month period where I was kind of like testing the waters in various places and wasn't quite focused on, the networking, the in-person networking. But then probably like, let's say maybe January of 2023 is when I really decided, all right, I'm just going to start going to video game events and seeing what happens. So, you could start the clock from like when I graduated with my undergrad in like 2018 in composition. You could start the clock when I graduated my graduate school in 2022, or you could start the clock in 2023 when I was like, I'm going to really get at this networking thing personally, because that's when I started getting like my business mindset. That's where I say like how long I've been doing it for, which amounts to what, like 2.5 years now?
Right.
Like,
I mean, that
years
to
now?
me, it sounds like that's when you really got serious.
That's when I got serious about it. Like, my musical journey has been lifelong, of course.
Yeah.
But my business focus, I'd say everything we've been talking about in this conversation relates to what I've been doing and what I've been trying to do since, let's just say, January of 2023. So we're, a little over 2 years then. 2 years and 3 months or so.
Awesome. It sounds like you've made really good progress over that time.
I think so.
I think you made a really good point earlier about like you get to a certain point, you're feeling comfortable, you're getting working regularly, and then maybe you just start neglecting continuing to establish your brand because you feel like, oh, I'm at a comfortable place, and you think it's going to last forever, and then you get the rug pulled from under you, and now you're scrambling. So I think it's always important to, no matter what industry you're in, to always continually build your brand, even if you have a high paying job or you're having a ton of clients.
Yeah, you don't ever want to ignore the fact that like you're the maker of your own business, right? If you're in this sort of position, if you're effectively an entrepreneur, and like the truth is you do get to comfortable periods where like it's safe to plateau for a little bit. It's not that that's a bad thing, but you just got to remember, it's like maybe I'm not going to be going to networking events as frequently. Maybe I'm not going to be posting as frequently, but I'm still going to be doing it. And then maybe if you start to notice that plateau dip a little bit, you're like, okay, I gotta turn the engine back on and get this curve going up again. And I think that's the shape of a film composer's career, like an entrepreneur's career, in some sense. At least that's the one. That's kind of the format I've noticed in other people, and that's the format that I think I'm on.
Yeah, I know a lot of musicians or music supervisors that we've had on the show, often they state the same truth, is that their musical journey is not linear. It's more truly all over the map.
It's all over the map, and everyone has a different way of entering the industry too. So that's like something else I'd say to someone just starting out, and something that was said to me, in which is a reason why you don't necessarily want to compare yourself to others. Rather, you want to use them as inspiration, because man, your entry into the industry is going to be yours. Everyone has some sort of I got lucky story, because you do really, but you put yourself in the right positions so that you put yourself in high probability positions, consistently, and then you will get lucky. That's just
correct.
How math works.
Yeah.
And I think it comes down to kind of like what I've heard about a lot of small businesses. It usually takes 3 to 5 years to turn a profit. So initially, no matter what you're doing, you're not going to immediately just have success. You got to keep going. And then, after the 3 or 5 year mark, you've been consistent, and then boom, it possibly just explodes from there.
I've heard those numbers too, like 3 years, 6 years. Every once in a while, you hear someone throw around, it's only going to take you 6 months. And sometimes people get lucky. Sometimes that happens. But like my experience in talking to other people, and, I think the trajectory that I'm on right now too, yeah, I feel like I'm on pace for somewhere in between that 3 to 5 year mark, a 3 to 6 year mark. It will be serious, or I'll have reached like that initial plateau of comfortability, and maybe I'll be on my next upswing or something. Like I definitely see that in my future. And I think that's a good perspective to have. Like you need to have a long-term perspective on this stuff.
Do you think
Um,
you need to be highly analytical for your field?
oh, that's a good question. So, do you need to be highly analytical? I mean, you definitely need to be self-critical, not to a point where you are self-disparaging, but you do need to be able to look back on like the past few months and just be able to say like honestly what worked and what didn't. I think some people are more analytical than others, and that can be to people's benefit or detriment. You know, I've found myself being over analytical on things that don't matter, right? But then
Same
I've also found
here.
that,
Yeah, same
yeah,
here.
yeah. Um, but I am incredibly analytical, and I just think that has, that bodes well for me in a lot of situations as well. So it's all about finding balance. But naturally, people will be like that to different extents. I think maybe a way to frame it is, like I said, just be okay with maybe having these benchmarks throughout the year where you reflect and you say, honestly, is this working? Right? Honestly, what do I need to change?
Yeah, I know one
Thanks.
thing me and Kev often look at are, we'll call them the small wins. Okay. We had a great episode with this person. Okay. Now we're building upon that going forward to the next episode. Just, having these small victories over time, eventually they build up into this pretty grand thing. Before you know it, then it's huge.
Yeah, the small victories are good. Remembering to celebrate yourself, right? Because if you are over analytical and critical, it can be hard to remember certain things that you really should be celebrating. Like you're putting in a lot of work, and you deserve a little bit of time. Um, I definitely don't do that enough, so I should take my own advice there.
Same here. Yeah, no, I'm the
Yeah,
same way.
yeah.
Yeah, awesome, man. We're at the top of the hour, man. Where can people find you at? And did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts?
Yeah, so you can find me at Ono Notes on Instagram and TikTok, and you can just look up my name, Owen Andruchow, on LinkedIn and find me there. That's where I'm most active. The handle is ohno.notes. Yeah, keep at it. I mean, if you have whatever your dreams are, whatever you are aspiring to do, if you're if you're doing something truly unique, it probably will take somewhere in between this 3 to 5 year window to make it happen. Um, so keep that marathon mentality in mind for sure, and that'll get you far.
Man, it was a pleasure having you back, and we'll definitely have you back on, man. We look forward to your journey. I definitely see a lot of big things in your future.
I appreciate it, guys. It's really fun to kind of share these benchmarks. So thank you.
Yeah, that was fun, man. Thanks for coming on tonight.
Awesome. And we like to thank everybody for tuning in. We'll catch y'all next time. Peace.